My name is Jonatan Vseviov, and I'm an Estonian diplomat. Diplomats were storytellers. We talk, we use words as our weapons, as our tools. So it might come as a bit of a surprise to you when I say that in international affairs, it doesn't really matter what we say. It doesn't even matter what we do. When it comes to shaping history, the only thing that matters is the result we're able to achieve. It's the result that defines us. Russia's large-scale war of aggression against Ukraine has now lasted for 2 years, and its result is not yet known. This aggression could succeed, or it could fail. One thing is certain, like all other wars before it, one day this war too will end. Peace will break out. The sort of peace we will have will depend on the way this war ends. It will depend on this war's result. A lot is at stake, obviously for Ukraine, but also for Russia, certainly for us Europeans. Ukraine is fighting for its very existence, not just as a state, but as a nation. You know the famous slogan, if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. And it's right. Ukraine's collapse would be catastrophic. We've seen what it would look like. We saw it in Bucha. We saw it in Irpin. We're seeing it every day in occupied territories where Russia is attempting to eradicate Ukrainianness as such. But Vladimir Putin, too, has determined that Russia's existential interests are at stake, that a free and independent Ukraine, as part of the European family of nations, is a danger to Russia and its vision of itself, a final nail in the coffin of the Soviet Union, which demise Putin himself once described as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. A free and democratic Ukraine can indeed seem dangerous to the Putin regime. Remember, Putin has always argued that while in many ways European, Russia is nevertheless fundamentally different. This idea of Russia's uniqueness is obviously older than Putin. It goes back to Moscow seeing itself as a third Rome, a sort of carrier of a civilizational torch with its own historic and global ambitions and responsibilities. Putin has used this vision of Russia's uniqueness as justification for his system of government that is fundamentally different from the way we in the West govern ourselves. And at the same time, Putin has always seen Ukraine as an integral part of Russia. In many ways, Russia does trace its origins to Ukraine. Before there was Moscow, and certainly way before St. Petersburg, there was Kiev. True Ukrainian sovereignty does not fit in this picture. So if indeed those Ukrainians decide to turn away from the Russian idea and build a European-style democracy and succeed, and the whole concept of Russia's uniqueness collapses. And with it, a big part of the rationale why the Russian people are destined to Putinist rule, a threat to the Putin regime indeed. Russia has made clear time and again, with word and action alike, its goals have not changed. They want all of Ukraine, all of it. Their goals are not limited to Ukraine. As Moscow made clear in the run-up to the war, they want to see a fundamentally reshaped European security order, with NATO pushed back to its pre-1997 borders, creating a buffer zone of sorts between themselves and what they consider the true West. This desire for a buffer zone is not informed by military considerations only, or even primarily. If it were just NATO's tanks that Russia was afraid of, then surely they would not have left their borders undefended when they invaded Ukraine. No, it's not military considerations that are important here. It's not the military danger of NATO on Russia's borders that they are afraid of when it comes to the current European security order. It is the existence of that order as such that is seen as dangerous. See, a democratic and united Europe is an idea, and that idea has considerable drawing power. People beyond our borders want to live like we do. That's the problem with ideas. They tend to cross borders. The Soviets found that out the hard way when millions of Central and Eastern Europeans aspired for an alternative, and revolted against communist rule. The life strength of this European idea stems from the success of it. Europe is richer than ever before, and certainly richer than Russia has ever been. Free Europe has enjoyed unprecedented peace, both internally and externally, and certainly more so than Russia has been able to. And under NATO umbrella, Europe has been secure, rich, at peace, and secure. And what's worse, multinational, including both the Catholics and the Lutherans, and yes, the Orthodox, including people as diverse as the French and the Germanics, the Greeks and the Balts, and yes, the Slavs. Integrated, democratically governed, stronger together, and immediately on Russia's borders, a threat, not because of anything that we do, because of who we are. Because if the European model continues to succeed, then it will continue to motivate people beyond our borders. It will continue to motivate people in Russia who aspire for a similarly European and democratic future. That is a threat to the Putin regime indeed. So whether we Europeans want it or not, we're already involved in this war. Not kinetically, no, at least not yet. But the existential interest of ours to live in a united and democratic Europe is at odds with Russia's interest to reshape the European security order. And Ukraine's existential interest to exist is at odds with Putin's desire to preserve an empire. A loss in Ukraine would not immediately lead to the collapse of the European project, the European security order, but it would be its catalyst. We might not even recognize the defeat immediately. We in the West are, after all, very, very good at PR. We're good at hiding our losses. We're good at explaining them away. Think back to NATO's war in Afghanistan. We lost that war. Taliban is back. But when did we lose it? Certainly not when the last American planes dramatically departed. No, happened sometime before. We celebrate our victories with concrete dates in mind. Our defeats have vaguer anniversaries, but they're defeats nevertheless. There's no hiding from it. A victorious Russia would not stop in its tracks. It would lick its wounds and continue, preferably at a conference table, where they would attempt to negotiate from a position of strength a new European security order, a Europe with buffer zones, where some Europeans' fate would be decided over their heads, and where the Chamberlains of our day would surely again announce that they've delivered peace for our times, by again attempting to satisfy the hunger of an aggressor by feeding it the freedom of others. Wars are not just contests of arms. They are first and foremost contests of wills. Wars end when one side is no longer able or willing to sustain a course it's chosen. Wars typically follow a pattern where after initial rapid gains for one side, they develop into a sort of a plateau. Things settle. Both sides push forward, not just militarily, but on their overall war strategies. But there appears to be a stalemate. And during that plateau, it might feel that the plateau will last forever. Just like, for instance, in early 1943, on the Eastern Front of the Second World War, it might have seemed that the plateau will last forever. The battles were raging on the front lines, but life in capitals had returned to near normal. But plateaus don't last forever. They end. And in big wars, where existential interests are at stake, the end of the plateau usually comes in the form of a collapse that is fundamental. 2 years later, the Red Army was in Berlin. Wars are costly. They're tiring. We feel it here in Europe as we house Ukrainian refugees and reorient our economies while providing significant resources for the Ukrainian cause. The Ukrainians obviously feel it, first and foremost in the enormous human toll this war has exerted. And worry not, the Putin regime feels it politically, economically, militarily. All are hurting. All are racing towards the end of the plateau. One will reach it first, and that side loses. When wars end, then history does not magically reset itself and take us back to the last pre-war day from where to continue as if nothing had happened. No, history always goes forward to a changed world. Like after the end of the First World War, we did not automatically go back to the last day before the Archduke was shot. And we went forward to a fundamentally changed world. And the day after the Second World War ended, we didn't go back to August 31st of 1939. We went forward to a fundamentally changed world. And the same will happen when this war ends. We'll have a fundamentally changed Ukraine, fundamentally changed Russia. We're going to have a fundamentally changed Europe. And perhaps more importantly, we'll have new norms of international behavior, shaped not by the elegance of our words or the heroic nature of our deeds, but by the results that we manage to achieve. Depending on this war's result, it will either become the norm that a larger state can change its smaller neighbor's borders with force, or not. It will either become the norm that a larger state can decide whether its smaller neighbor gets to exist, not just as a state, but as a nation, or not. Aggression as a tool of statecraft will either be discredited, or it will become the norm that under certain circumstances, a major global nuclear power can commit aggression with impunity. If we allow territorial integrity and sovereignty to be reduced to nothing but empty phrases in outdated treaties, then show me on the map of Europe a border that remains secure. And if we allow the concept of spheres of influence to make a comeback from the dustbin of history with the great powers of the world dividing up continents between them, then show me on this planet a country big enough to feel safe. You might point to a few great powers, but I doubt you'd point to any European ones. And finally, if we allow the most basic of international rules to be trampled on in our backyard, on our watch, then tell me, who are we? Is we, the people of Europe, who we've claimed to stand for a rules-based international order? Remember, we're not defined by our words or by our action. We're defined by the results we manage to achieve. If no longer defined by this idea, then what will continue to unite us? Nothing. Nothing at all. And then we will face the challenges of the 21st century, not as a united Europe, but as a collection of quarreling mid-sized powers, blaming each other for what surely will seem as an avoidable defeat. The challenges of the 21st century are not the reason to turn away from Ukraine. They're the very reason we need to achieve Ukraine's victory. Can't hide ourselves from history. Can't be done. We can either lose or we can win. And my suggestion would be to win and push Russia to change its course and pull itself back into Russia. Because having Russia pull itself back into Russia is, after all, the ultimate goal of ours. Nothing more, but nothing less. For that to happen, we need to convince the people in power in Moscow that the strategy they pursue is unsustainable, that it is in their best interest to change course. It can be done. It was done only recently, when the West managed to push Russia to change course and pull itself back from Central and Eastern Europe. The very fact that we're standing here in free Estonia as part of united Europe is proof of it. Can be done. There's 400 million of us Europeans. Together with our allies across the Atlantic, we're 1 billion people, the richest people in the world, with the mightiest military alliance that history has ever seen. And we're in a struggle for our future with a country that Senator John McCain once famously described as nothing but a gas station with nukes. Ladies and gentlemen, it shouldn't even be a contest, but it is. Because Putin believes that in a war of attrition, time is on his side, that sooner rather than later, democracies prove to be weaker, that we will elect to change course, and that our will crumbles first. For us to succeed, we need to prove that argument wrong. We need to demonstrate that this argument, this lasting element in Putin's theory of victory is mistaken, and that it is precisely in the long term where democracies enjoy an advantage over autocracies. There are two ways we can prove that our policies have staying power, no matter who wins our next elections, no matter how turbulent our electoral campaigns may seem. One is by taking the aggressor to independent courts of law, the International Criminal Court, or establishing a tribunal for the crime of aggression. Another way, by confiscating Russia's frozen assets for the benefit of Ukraine's reconstruction. Both would send the same message. Both would leave lasting effects, without any future government of ours easily able to overturn them. And on Ukraine's path towards NATO and the European Union, a goal that would secure Ukraine and stabilize Europe, we need to move ahead as fast as possible and prove, not to ourselves, but to Putin and the people who keep him and his policies around, that our policies have staying power and that we have indeed reached a point of no return. The time is on our side, and on the side of a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. Now, some might say that pushing a major global nuclear power could be dangerous, that it could lead to uncontrolled escalation. It would be reckless. They might even tell you that famous story of a rat that's being pushed to the kitchen corner, after which the rat has no other option but to attack. That logic has two flaws. First, the Russian people have not suddenly lost their minds. They continue to be rational, and they know that NATO is a nuclear alliance too. Deterrence works both ways. The reason why Russia's leaders use irresponsible nuclear rhetoric is not to warn us kind-heartedly of our imminent doom. It is to paralyze us with fear so that we would hesitate, pause, if not stop in our tracks, deliberate a little longer when trying to decide whether to provide Ukraine with Western armaments, as was the taboo only recently. We've broken those taboos, and Russia has continued to behave rationally. But mind you, time is of the essence. We're not in a static environment. We're in a race with a competitor who's trying to outlast us and outlast Ukraine. That's the reason why the Russians use irresponsible nuclear rhetoric. It's to buy time, not to blow up the planet. And now on that rat. Ladies and gentlemen, have you not been paying attention? The rat is already on the attack. It's no longer in the kitchen. It's in the middle of our living room, attacking us, having already declared the kitchen to be his property. After years of attempting to corrupt us with the promise of cheap energy and undermining our democracies covertly, the rat is now finally on a proper attack, trying to push us from our homes. The time to worry about the rat's attack is in the past. Now's the time to deal with it, or live with the consequences of a Europe torn apart, partially run by a rat. If you think that our victory could be scary with a defeated and potentially destabilized Russia on our borders, then consider our defeat. It would be much scarier still. And if you think that surely the situation must not be that black and white, that perhaps a compromise of some sorts could be worked out with parts of Ukraine handed over for promises of peace, and think again and consider whether Russia has indeed changed its goals in this war, or whether they are using the lure of an easy way out as a trap meant to unravel our unity, only for them to continue their onslaught. And then think long and hard about our own European history, and you'll realize that sometimes some things are just as black and white as they seem. Results matter. Let's go get them. Thank you.